In one single day, more Jews were killed in that day than any other day since the Nazis went for the mass extermination of Jews in the Holocaust.
I wanted to invite someone on this morning who has been, I think, very clear and has made a lot of sense. He's also someone I interviewed not so long ago. He's Howard Sackstein. He's a well-known commentator here in South Africa. He, to my mind, ruffles feathers all over the place with his opinions, but he has a very, very straightforward, very logical, very rational take on plenty of the stuff in the news. I like reading what he has to say. He upsets his own home crowd sometimes, but this time I think it is very clear that we need to understand what's happening and what's taken place in Israel over the weekend, because there are going to be loads of opinions thrown around this week, and many of them will be pure propaganda. Many of them will be designed to appeal emotionally and politically to people. I think it's very important that we see this for what it is in terms of the events that have unfolded. And I've decided to invite Howard on because he's someone who makes a lot of sense in this respect. Howie, it's nice to see you. It's not nice to talk about what's going on, but what's your take on this, my friend?
Well, Gareth, it's good to be back, but the circumstances are terrible. It's been one terrible weekend, and maybe we just start by recapping what happened. So on Saturday morning, 6:30 in the morning, Hamas, who are the dictatorship terrorist fascists who controlled the Gaza Strip, launched their first salvo of 2,000 rockets at Israeli cities. Now, over the last 2 days, 2.5 days, those numbers of rockets that have been launched at Israeli civilian areas have gone from 2,000 to approximately 4,300. In fact, a cousin of mine's home was destroyed by a rocket that smashed into his apartment building. Luckily, he wasn't home at the time. Wow. But at the same time, Hamas terrorists broke through the border, the international border between Gaza and Israel, and invaded Israel. Thousands of armed militia troops. They went into villages and towns and kibbutzim, and they massacred everyone they could find. They shot people sitting at a bus stop. They went into people's homes, killed entire families, women, children, adults, elderly people. They walked into women in wheelchairs and slaughtered them. One person posted on Facebook that her grandmother was at home. A Hamas terrorist walked in, murdered her, filmed the murder, and then went onto her computer and posted the video of her murder on her Facebook page so her entire family could see it. They went to a music festival, and you must understand that this attack was by land, by sea, and by air. There was a music festival happening in the desert in Israel. It was a nature rave, and the music festival was surrounded. They've so far recovered 260 people who were massacred at the music festival. There are South Africans who are dead. There are South Africans who are missing. There are South Africans who've had their homes destroyed. But so far, the death toll, more than 700 civilians were massacred on Saturday. In one single day, more Jews were killed in that day than any other day since the Nazis went for the mass extermination of Jews in the Holocaust.
Howie,
this is devastating.
Now, I mean, the disgraceful cost of human lives here is one part of this, but I want to ask you quickly about the meta story here. Why now? We've had Hamas and the people of the Gaza Strip with all of their sometimes legitimate, sometimes not legitimate complaints about how they're treated by Israel. But we've had kind of a stalemate for a long while now. We've had a situation at least where people were, Israel had to constantly be on the alert for rocket attacks, which were never ending. There were always very big concerns about people tunneling under the walls, coming into Israel, causing all kinds of, but it was more or less like handling a very aggressive neighbor who keeps on threatening to do things. This is an all-out attack. This is coordinated. It was planned. People are saying Iran was involved. Why now?
So I think you can't discuss this without talking about Iran and the broader geopolitical context of what's happening in the Middle East.
Right.
So Israel and Saudi Arabia are becoming closer and closer, and the relations between the two countries are in the process of being what they call normalized. Saudi Arabia and Iran are implacable enemies. And as part of the deal on normalization, the Americans are purportedly going to be signing a defense treaty with Saudi Arabia and providing the Saudis with nuclear enrichment capability. This allows the Saudis to counter the influence of Iran in the area. The Iranians are going to try do absolutely everything to try prevent this happening. And one of the methods that they would have would be to try provoke an all-out war between Israel and its proxies, because Hamas are the proxies of the mullahs in Iran, to try provoke a war and what will be a massive response from Israel in order to try scupper the Saudi-Israel-American deal. And so you have to understand this within a much broader political context here. There are geopolitical forces at play. The Iranians, who are probably the worst human rights abusers in the world, and I don't think we need to go into that. We understand what they do to women. We understand what they do to minorities. You'll see there was a woman beaten unconscious this week for not having her head covered. But we understand that for them, this is a war between Shia Islam and Sunni Islam. And they want to try weaken the Saudi-Western alliance while at the same time increase their influence in the Middle East. And that's why there's great fear at the moment that a second front will open, because Iran's proxies in Lebanon, Hezbollah, have started firing rockets at Israel as well.
Now, I mean, a lot of people talk about how Israel is in a constant battle for survival. This is not an exaggeration by any means. You just mentioned up in the north in Lebanon, Hezbollah are the other proxies of Iran, and we've got the West Bank, which is, of course, on the other side. This violence all came from Gaza, but a war on three fronts, is that something that Israel can conceivably handle? That's what everybody's concerned about. It breaks out on all three fronts. Is that going to be insurmountable for Israel?
No, look, Israel's existence is not at threat. Israel is a major military and political power. The American fleets are moving towards the borders or off the coastline of Israel at the moment as a sign of support. And the Americans will provide weaponry to Israel. This isn't an issue of two conventional armies fighting each other. Hamas and Hezbollah are not conventional armies. They don't have soldiers in uniform necessarily. These are, in fact, terrorist organizations. And ultimately, it's much harder to fight a terrorist organization, but it's not an existential threat to the very existence of Israel. But when on one single day you've had 700 of your citizens murdered, more than 2,000 who have been injured, and what looks like approximately 130 to 160 people kidnapped and taken into Gaza, you're heading for a major, major conflict. Many, many thousands of people will die over the next few weeks. If the hostages are not released, if the civilians that have been taken are not released, all hell will break out in the Gaza Strip.
Howie, I spent a little bit of time just now talking about how there's going to be a huge amount of moral equivocation by political leaders all over the world. We're already seeing some of that happening, where they say one thing, but they're trying to please, in inverted commas, both sides here. Who has come out in support of Israel and who's come out in support of Hamas?
Shall we say almost everyone has come out in support of Israel. The entire civilized world, all of Europe, all of Western Europe. The Indians have been particularly supportive of Israel, the United States, Canada, much of South America, great parts of Africa, Rwanda, Kenya. There's been an enormous groundswell of support. Let's talk about who hasn't.
Yeah.
And who hasn't is South Africa.
Right.
Not the people of South Africa, because the responses over the last few days, my phone has been filled with just hundreds and hundreds of messages from friends of every religion, every race, every ethnicity, all saying, what can we do to help? We're so worried about you and your family. But the truth is, the South African government, who have no ability to talk about any moral issue, They have not condemned the attack on civilians. They have not offered any sympathy or empathy, and there are dead South Africans. There are missing South Africans, and the South African government has blamed Israel for everything.
Yeah.
It's not surprising, but it just shows the moral depth, ineptitude, incompetence of the South African government and their complete lack of caring about the South African Jewish community or their understanding of world politics.
And on social media, what do we see? Is there a balance of opinions there? Is there a complete imbalance? Or what are people saying? And what are the most worrying things that you've seen on social media? Because of course these things change as well. You know, governments in the wake of something awful like this, they tend to know what to say because it's programmed. But I don't know, Howie. It seems like in places that you would least expect it, London, New York, the centers of kind of Western civilization, you have people protesting openly about the genocide of the Jews and how this is a great thing. And you see people, you know, waving Palestinian flags and calling for the destruction of an entire race of people in a very open and honest and straightforward way. Are we to believe them? You know, I think you take people at their word in places like this. And I can't believe this is happening in New York, of all places, you know?
Well, you know something, we learn to take people at their word because, let's face it, the Hamas chart itself calls for the murder of Jews and the destruction of Israel. And people always said, no, they don't really mean that. Apparently, they actually, not only do they mean it, they carry it out. So when you have radicals, and let's face it, what we're talking about is a small group of radicals. And because of social media, we've given these radicals and these nutcases a voice. So of course we see it. But the overwhelming, vast majority of normal, peace-loving people understand the consequences of what has happened on the weekend and the massacre of the innocent. But let's face it, war is going to be dirty. A lot of blood is going to be spilt over the next few weeks. When hostages are going to be released, there is going to be bombardments. There are going to be innocent people killed on both sides. And public opinion shifts. People don't like to see blood on their TV screens. But the truth is, this is a battle for the very soul of the Middle East. Israel will extract the price. Israel will mete out justice for the massacres that have happened of their civilians. And no one should be surprised. And no one who hasn't come out to condemn what has happened should ever think that they have the moral authority to talk about anything ever again, especially not the consequences of what will follow from this attack.
All right, Howie, thank you. You helped make a lot of this much clearer to those of us who have maybe not been following it with the degree of kind of interest and evaluation that you've been able to provide us this morning. But I all I can say is, you know, I'm just thinking about all those people in Israel this morning, and I'm thinking about the people who may be held hostage, who may have been kidnapped, the people whose families are worried that they're still alive or not. And this is not just about like politics and territory, though those come into it. We know this is about people and, you know, possibly thousands of people who've been affected by one morning's activities that nobody could have foreseen. Just absolutely appalling. Thank you so much.
And Gareth, if we can say, there are tens of thousands of people in South Africa who have loved ones in Israel, because there's a very large South African community in Israel, probably 40, 50,000. There are people here who are worried about their families. There are people here whose families have been murdered. There are people here whose families are missing. And every single person in this country just needs to take a moment and think about the impact that this has on the individual, the impact on the South African Jewish community and all of our friends and our families who are living in absolute fear and terror.
Thank you, Howie. Howard Sackstein, and a very sobering point of view there, which I think we could all benefit from listening to. Thank you, Howie. Nice to see you.